it's not always the natural first response that comes to mind, but it's those processes and that way of talking to people. This boils down to conflict resolution and dialogue.
Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore what it means to find common ground at a time when it feels increasingly harder to do so, to listen more than we speak so that we can understand that our differences don't have to divide us. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before, so that you can then take that new knowledge and apply it to your ability to empathize with the people around you. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we truly reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and who we truly are. You know, I started this show with a theory. This idea that if we set aside our rush to form an opinion about everything, if we resisted the urge to debate and argue with people we disagree with, and instead got curious and asked more questions, that we'd reveal the common ground that exists between us. And many of the stories you've heard so far from the incredible guests that I've had on the show have provided support for this theory. But this week, you'll hear a story that provides such solid evidence of this truth, that strikes to the core of this idea of mine in ways that I haven't felt yet. You'll hear just how transformational asking questions can be, how the right question at the right time can break down barriers and cross divides in ways that no amount of facts or shouting can come close to touching. For 25 years, Jeff Schoep led the largest neo-Nazi organization in the United States, the National Socialist Movement. For more than 2 decades, Jeff spread propaganda, hatred, and fear, and his extremist views caused pain, anguish, and suffering for many. But just a few years ago, Jeff left that world behind. And what's more, Jeff didn't just leave, he started an organization called Behind Barriers to actively work to get others out as well, to recover minds and souls imprisoned by extremist ideologies. How? How could someone go from such one extreme to another? How can a person's entire identity be shaken so dramatically? As you'll hear in our conversation, Jeff's hate-filled worldview began to crumble when he was simply asked questions that caused him to, in his words, begin to see the humanity in others. Honestly, it gives me chills. This is the second part of a 2-part series on extremism. If you missed part 1, go back to episode 56 and my conversation with Jesse Morton, who for years led a radical Islamic group before he left that life and mindset behind. If people like Jesse and Jeff can be drawn away from such radical degrees of hate and animosity, why can't we all take their example and apply it to our own lives when we disagree with someone else? This conversation with Jeff provides clear-cut proof that there is significant truth to this theory of mine. That if we stop and ask more questions, lives and relationships can be redeemed. I was reading that you were initially hesitant to start your organization Beyond Barriers. Why?
Well, that's a really good question. there is some groups out there that do this kind of work that we do, but I just felt like the amount of people that were reaching out to me at the time, because first what I did was I started my personal website, jeffschoep.com, and there was people from the far right that were reaching out for help or reaching out for advice and things like that, and I couldn't keep up with it, so I needed to start something and organize something. And I felt like there wasn't a really solid answer to these problems here in the United States, that it wasn't being addressed correctly. So we started an organization and put together a team of some of the best people we could find. Daryl Davis, who is one of the very best at getting people out of these kind of movements. He's with us, and a number of really incredible former extremists. So we've been doing this work now since last year, officially anyways, with the nonprofit. Yes.
Daryl Davis has one of the best voices, doesn't he? Just amazing.
He's incredible on so many levels.
Oh my gosh. I am incredibly inspired by that man and his work. With the outreach that you were getting through your website, was it family members who were seeking help to get a family member out of an extremist organization, or was it folks who were in these organizations themselves? Like, what was the makeup of the people that you were connecting with through your site?
It was a little bit of both. Quite often, there was some family members reaching out, and there was some of that, but a lot of what were reaching out were people that were still in the movements. And because of the lengthy experience, because I had been involved for 27 years total, 25 as the national leader of the NSM, most of the people in the US and the far right know who I am. I know who they are. So there was a lot of people that were asking questions, that were curious. So, and the way I saw that, as long as it wasn't threatening or something like that, if they were just asking questions, this was an opportunity to talk. It was an opportunity. That door has been pushed open a little bit, or that window has been opened. So now you have an opportunity for dialogue. And doing the kind of work that we do, dialogue is everything. Respect is important. Dialogue is important, and starting those conversations. So a lot of times those emails, just to give the listening audience like a snapshot or a picture of this, a lot of them would ask things like, are you a communist now? Or are you an anarchist now? Things like that, because that, and it seems funny now, at the time it was kind of agitating to me, especially at first, when I first got out in early 2019, and the website, the first website went up in, jeffschoep.com went up in August of 2019. And that was a really common question. I was like, man, why do these people keep asking me if I'm a communist? And why that is because in the movement, first I tell them, no, I'm not a communist. Why do you think that? So it starts that conversation. But I thought the same way when I was involved, that to get out, that you have to become the opposite. So in the far right extremist movements, the biggest enemy, or one of the bigger enemies, is communists, far leftists, Antifa, all that. So when someone leaves, part of their narrative in the far right is to paint anyone that leaves as the enemy. So now you've left, you've spoken out against it, you must be a communist. You see, that's the mentality of it. So being able to explain that to those people and help them see, like, hey, you can leave and not be on the other extreme. That was really important. And that's one of the messages I think is missing a lot in this work today, is that a lot of people feel like when you leave, you have to become extreme to the other side, the complete opposite side. And that's not accurate. Most of the country, most of us are here in the middle. We're in the middle somewhere. You can be right leaning, you can be left leaning. Any of that's okay, but don't be an extremist. Don't get on that, far. Don't be a Nazi. Don't be involved in far left extremism. Don't get in the middle with the rest of us. That's what we want to try to get across. And I think that was missing. So that's one of the the reasons I feel we're really successful with what we do is because we understand that. Even if it's not a popular opinion, we understand it, and that's what we're doing.
You mentioned asking questions, dialogue, listening, and a word you used was respect in there. And I think we so often see when we're faced with an opposing viewpoint, especially in an issue as divisive as the far left versus the far right, and then all of us in the middle are stuck in the in between, that there is no room for respect. How do you bring respect to a conversation where you so vehemently disagree with the view that you're faced with on the other quote unquote other side?
Well, the best examples I can give for that is Daryl Davis and another friend of mine, Dia Khan, who is a Muslim filmmaker. They are the best at it. And we try to utilize those same thought processes. I want to use the word tactics, but it sounds too military. But we want to use those processes to reach people. So, for example, when Daryl Davis or Dia Khan, when they sit down with people, when we sit down with people, we disagree, with the far right and with that type of extremism or whatever type of extremist we're sitting down with. We don't just focus on the far right. We do far left de-radicalization and also religious de-radicalization and cults and everything else. But excuse me. But with respect, especially from the experience, the lived experience coming from the far right, respect is everything in those circles. So if you're sitting down with somebody and they're talking and you're listening, even no matter how vile the conversation is, the terrible things that you're hearing, once they're done, the respect demands that they have to listen to you. So now you have an opportunity to insert other ways of looking at things, to insert other ideas or suggestions. We're not forcing anyone to change their viewpoint or change their way of thinking, but through that dialogue, and this is something that across the country that we're seeing a lot of problems with, even between the Democrats and Republicans. People don't talk anymore. People don't have those conversations. So we're trying to show that there is a way for this conflict resolution, and there is a way to talk to people and be able to get things through. And it's about planting seeds. So in my own de-radicalization process, which I didn't even realize was happening at the time, most people don't, it was seeds that were planted. And later on, you start reflecting on that stuff. And when it finally clicks, that's when lives change.
Can you get into your process? Who planted those seeds? How were they planted? Can you you were the leader of the National Socialist Movement. Like, how in the world do you begin to come out of that?
Well, it wasn't easy. Yeah. And it takes work, but one of the reasons I speak out is to show people that it can be done. If I can do it, especially after all those years, literally anybody can do it. And we're working with people that some that were in even longer than I was, people that I would have never thought in a million years that I'd be working with now, helping them to walk that path too. So it can be done. And the seeds were planted, actually, it was a number of people, but I talk about the public ones, Daryl Davis and Dia Khan, because they're okay with me talking about it. They're part of my story. A lot of other people played a part as well. Here in the city of Detroit, where I'm based out of, there's a lot of other people too that don't want to be publicly named. But there was a lot of people. But the best way to explain it, it started with sitting down with Daryl Davis, and which at the time was for a film that he was doing called Accidental Courtesy, and this was nothing new for me in the movement, to meet with filmmakers and do films. We'd done films and stuff all the time, so it was no big deal. But what I didn't realize is that meeting this man would have an impact that would, change the rest of my life. And I want to explain to the viewers how that was done. And a lot of times there's a lot of misconceptions about these type of movements where people will say it's all about hate. And I don't want to lessen that. hate is fostered there, hate is developed there, but almost nobody joins these movements based on hate. Hate is developed there. No one, as a recruiter, as somebody that did this for 27 years total, 25 as the national leader of the largest group of its kind, I know this stuff like the back of my hand. That's why I feel this responsibility to speak out, because I do understand these processes. I know why people got involved, why they joined, those sorts of things. And nobody wakes up in the morning and says to themselves, you know what? I'm going to be the bad guy. I'm going to do something terrible and like hate on people and hold other people down. I met a few of those types over the years in the movement, and typically they were people like sociopaths or psychopaths. There's something wrong with someone that thinks that way. And when I met them, even when I was in the movement, those types of people, they made me nervous because I felt like they were potential liabilities, like somebody that could go do something terrible and be a liability to the organizations. Those types of people made me nervous, and they are there, but those are the vast minority. Most of the people that are in, and myself included, I believed that I was doing something noble, something honorable, something good. And I know to the listening public, they're going, how the heck would you think that, And that's part of the problem, is that people don't realize that when the people that are getting involved in this stuff, they really truly believe they're doing something good. So when you're pushing back on them and telling them they're wrong, it just strengthens that resolve. They're like, oh, well, this person's an enemy, so I'm just going to keep, fighting against them. Anytime pressure was put on me over all those years to get out, I doubled down. I did twice as much when I felt pressure, when someone would dox me or do something or punch me in the face or anything like that. It just got me to double down. But a little off on the side subject there.
Good.
But to answer your question, Daryl Davis, when I met Daryl for this filming, he was talking about how hatred affected him as a child. And when he was a boy and in the Boy Scouts, a young man, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, very young. He was in a parade and adults were throwing rocks at him, pelting him with rocks while he was in this Boy Scout parade because he was the only black child that was there. And his parents had explained it to him when he got home. Well, Daryl, they did that to you because you were black. And he didn't understand it. He said, well, how can they hate me when they don't know me? And that sent him on his quest that he's still on to this day to answer that question. And what really bothered me about that, and it was a similar story with Dia Khan. What got to me about Daryl's story was I was picturing it the way he explained it. I pictured it in my head, and I thought about my own kids, and it was like, if this ideology is driving people to do this type of thing and making other people feel that way, especially children, as somebody who thought like, I'm doing this fight for our future generations, for our children, all this kind of stuff, all the sort of things the far right says, that hit me pretty hard. And how I would respond to that if somebody had done that to one of my kids is something I wouldn't want to say on the air, but it put it in perspective. So how to explain this is he showed me his humanity. And when you're involved in something like the extreme far right, I wouldn't have said this before when I was involved in it because you don't see it. But looking back and putting yourself back in that situation, you lose your humanity when you're part of a movement like that. It's like it's not gone forever, but it's lost. It's like you're not able to connect with it. It's missing because you become hard to the world and everything else. You're at war with the world. So basically, you're like, what do I care about what some black person or what some Jewish person, or I don't care. They're not part of my people. They're not part of my bubble, or they're not behind the same barriers. So they're the enemy. And when you start seeing the humanity of the so-called other, it's like a light switch turns back on. And with Dia Khan, it was a similar situation. I got to know her quite well over the course of filming White Right Meeting the Enemy. her Emmy-winning film, because I was one of the main characters in the film. So we spent quite a bit of time together and grew, and it developed into a friendship. And a similar scenario happened, and she was like, when I was a child, she was talking about being chased by skinheads and how that affected her and how it made her feel ugly and hated and like less than a person. And I could see and feel the pain in her face. We're sitting across from each other. That was the end for me. That I was still in another year or so after, maybe 2 years after that, but that was the beginning of the end, because that hit me like a ton of bricks. It was devastating.
How do you think you would have reacted had either of them pointed the finger, said you're wrong, listed out the litany of things that you had done wrong? What would your response have been?
Like every other time for years and years and years, when people would approach and say those things, you just double down and you just push back against it. And that's why they're very unique. And those processes are very unique. And having those conversations, a lot of people, like when I speak now, and I spoke in a synagogue, it was last year or the year before. And, we asked people like, well, how many of you would walk up and talk to a guy with a swastika tattoo? Or it was either myself or the other guy that was there with me. Had asked that question, and everybody was like, nope, they wouldn't. And we don't recommend that people go and have these conversations necessarily either. But if you are of that persuasion, or you feel like you can get through to people. And I wish we had more people in the country that were doing this, even between the Republicans and Democrats. Just talk, have these conversations, even, and as difficult as they may be, you find that you have more in common with one another than you do differences. And we're losing that in this country right now. And it's interesting doing the work that I do now, talking with some of the different people. I talked with a guy that was still active in an organization. And by the time, and this was a few weeks back, and he had said by the end of the conversation, he was like, you know what? This was really cool. We are on opposite sides of the spectrum on things, but we didn't get mad at each other. We had this nice conversation. It just blows me away. And I was like, well, why is that shocking? And he's like, nobody has these conversations anymore. We're in different camps. It's just it's so nice to be able to just talk. And I was like, wow, that's something we need to, as a country, as humanity, we need to get better at that. We need to return to that.
27 years in, what were you seeking? What was the thing that was the driver to become a part of the movement? And what was the hole in your life that the movement presented a solution or a filler for?
Well, everybody's story is a little different, and a lot of people want to that study this stuff want to be able to put it in all in a checkbox, and say, well, I know some of them push the issue that it was trauma for different people. I didn't have trauma. I mean, not any more than any other person. Everybody's had some trauma, but I wouldn't say I had like any terrible upbringing or some of the, these terrible things that happen to people. So everybody has different reasons. For me personally, my story is a little bit different than a lot of the people that I know, because for me, it was an interest in history, and there was a family connection. My grandfather and my great uncles all fought. My mom's side of the family is from Germany. So her and my grandparents had immigrated to the United States after the war. So after World War II. So my grandfather and great uncles all fought in the German army during World War II. So I was always fascinated with that. I've always been fascinated with history. I'm still fascinated with history, but in this particular case, finding interest in that German history of that particular time frame I could say now, well, I wish I wouldn't have been fascinated, and it might have spared me 27 years of being involved in this stuff. But at least having that knowledge helps me with the work that I do now. It helps me to help other people. So maybe it was all for a reason. I don't know. But for me, it was that interest in that family history, even though my family discouraged me from being involved in it. Even my grandfather had just a few years back had said to me, he says, being involved in this stuff is going to wind you up in one of two places. They're going to kill you or they're going to put you in prison. And my response to him at that time, because I was still quite radical, it was pretty nasty. And I said some things to him that I regret saying to this day.
How did you come up through the ranks so quickly? I mean, you said 27 years in, 25 of those spent leading the organization. What was that path like for you?
Well, I didn't have any designs or desire to be in charge of the organization, but when I first joined in the early 90s, I got active. I started recruiting. I was really good at it, I guess you could say. I was bringing in a lot of people. And the organization, the National Socialist Movement at that time was quite small. It was an old organization that started back in 1973, 74 by men that served with George Lincoln Rockwell, who was the original founder of the American Nazi Party. And when I was looking at all the organizations in the United States of which to join, back to that historical connection, these guys were connected with Rockwell, who was the closest thing to an American version of the German movement. So that's why I ended up in that particular organization. But it was quite small by the time I had joined, with just members in Minnesota and a couple of other states. And within a couple of years of joining, the leader of the organization was ready to move away and retire. And he felt like I was the person that should run the organization, and said, well, I'm leaving. I'm going to turn the organization over to you. And I was like 20 years old or something, 21, somewhere around there at that time. And I was kind of in shock. I was like, oh no, this is terrible. This doesn't sound like a good idea. But at the same time, I just took it on. And by the time I left, it was the largest organization of its kind in the country.
What were you fighting for? What was the mission? What was the driver that you as an organization were focused on bringing to fruition?
Well, basically, what I felt like is that we were going to save the white race. That's what most of the people that are involved in this stuff feel like. They feel like the white race is under attack, that Jewish people are controlling the world, that they're going to enslave whites, that they want to dumb everybody down through race mixing, miscegenation. I can't even say the word. Through race mixing, basically, they have these beliefs in the movement of those different things, and it all goes back to fear. And in a hypermasculine environment like the movement, no one will admit that it's fear. I know Dia challenged me a few times. She goes, "This sounds like you guys are kind of afraid of genocide, of this, that," when I was still in. And I just remember scowling at her and going, "You don't know what you're talking about. Well, I'm not afraid of nothing, but when you break it down, when you get out and you break it back down and you look, you reflect on those things, it's all fear. It's all fear, almost entirely fear. That's the motivator."
As you begin to get these questions from Dia, from Daryl, as you've mentioned, and you begin to have these conversations where you begin to see their humanity, your own humanity that you said was lost, take me through, if you could, what happens inside your head? Like, what are the conversations that you have inside your head of these seemingly conflicting, well, obviously conflicting ideas?
Well, that's a really good question. In particular, with Dia, there was some questions that she had asked me, some on camera, some off camera, or that didn't appear in the film. But there was a question or she had made a statement when we were talking about like the economy here in Detroit and how people are out of work and all this kind of stuff. And she goes, you have some valid points, Jeff. There is a lot of homelessness and a lot of people out of work and a lot of, Detroit's a perfect example of economic struggle. That all makes sense. But why are you just talking about white people? In fact, let me go a little further. Not just white people, but just some white people, because the movement only talks about the certain white people, not all white people. And at the time, I just spewed out whatever movement response I could think of at the time. But in the back of my head, it really bothered me because apparently nobody put that question to me in that way before, because it really started eating away at me, because I was saying to myself, and it wasn't just that was just one example, but there was a number of questions where she had posed questions that I didn't have an answer for. And I don't like not having the answer. I don't like not having the answer to something. So I started dwelling on those things. And that's when we talk about planting seeds, that she was able to plant those seeds that got me questioning things, that got me really starting to think deeply about that. And why couldn't I answer it? Well, because it's wrong. It's not a correct form of belief. And she wasn't telling me it was wrong. Like a lot of people, when you get in those situations, it's human nature to want to tell somebody, like if someone is telling you, hey, the sun is green. Well, we all know it doesn't look green. We can go show you, we want to say, no, it's not green, and argue with them. Instead, there's better ways of going about this and getting through to people. And you have to think about it. And it's not always the natural first response that comes to mind, but it's those processes and that way of talking to people. This boils down to conflict resolution and dialogue.
How long was it between those initial seeds getting planted and was it a moment where you said, I'm done, I'm out? How long was that process for you?
Well, for me, it took a few years. It wasn't, a lot of people will say, well, what was that got you moment, or what was that final moment? And for me, it was a series of things. It was not one particular moment. It was a series of things, and it was reflecting on that, reflecting back on those things, that finally I just said, this is enough. There was some of the final straws, I guess you could say, because I stayed in. That was those conversations with Daryl and Dia were 2016, 2017. And when I finally made the decision to get out, which I was talking about well before that, but you couldn't talk to anybody in the movement about it, so the people that knew that I was leaving, you could count on one hand. It was Dia Khan was one of them, and my family, and that a couple of girls that I knew here locally, and that was it. Like literally, that was just about it. And you can't have those conversations about leaving with, especially as the leader of the organization. It was a lot to process. But so the process, I guess, what I was trying to say was, you want people, when you're doing this type of work, when you're trying to change hearts and minds, you want people to be disengaged and then de-radicalized. My process was backwards. I was de-radicalizing before I disengaged, which we don't recommend to anybody, but that's how it worked for me, because I was in that leadership position in the group. So I'm trying to reflect my changes on the group. And the best way I can explain this is like that old phrase that goes, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. That's that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to put new rules into effect on the organization to try to dress it up to make it look like something it wasn't. And I didn't realize that at the time. I look back on it now and think, wow, how stupid was that? Like, how did I not see that? But when you're involved in this stuff, at the time, it made total sense. I was like, well, I can rebrand the organization. I can make it into a white civil rights organization. I can make it into something good, because if hate is hurting people, I don't want to be part of that, but I can still do something good with this. And you can't, you just can't. I mean, it's not feasible. It's not, it was my way of trying to fix a problem, or what I saw was a problem. And there's another old phrase that says, this is your bed, now you have to lie in it. That was one of the things that I struggled with a lot about getting out. And would society ever accept somebody like me back into civil society? Again, and that goes back into that fear category. Like, should I just stay because this is everything I know, because this is everything I've done in my almost entire adult life? I couldn't, because once I realized that it was wrong, I felt not only did I have I could have walked away and done something else. I ran a business. I know business. There's other things I could have done besides speaking out, but I felt I had a responsibility to try to repair some of the damage done by the past, and make a difference and actually do something good, instead of just thinking that I was doing something good in the past, which was really bad. Actually doing something good by helping others.
You mentioned your family knew, and they were aware that you were having these thoughts. How did you have those conversations? What were those conversations like, Jeff? I mean, were they involved like you? Like, how do you begin to justify, I'll use that phrase, to your family, and then work your way out of it?
My family did not approve of what I was involved in the entire time, all those 27 years. They tried like heck to get me out, to discourage me from it. And there came a point in time, and I was very, very fortunate, very lucky to have a family like this, where a lot of other people don't. A lot of people, when they get involved in this stuff, they will close the door on their family, basically, or their family will close the door on them. It's a lot of times it's one way or the other. And in our family, it was causing a lot of arguing and problems early on when I was younger. And we had come to an agreement. I don't remember what year or anything, but eventually it came to a point where it was like, let's not talk politics. We can maintain our family bonds and all this kind of stuff if we just don't talk about politics. So it was just something like, I didn't talk about what I did. And if they saw me on the news or something, it was usually just not mentioned. Or if they had any kind of issues, most of the time it just wasn't mentioned. So in that sense, I consider myself very fortunate, because a lot of the people that I knew and know, those family bonds are broken. There's even someone that I know, they've been out for years and years and years, and they haven't been able to repair some of those family bonds from the past. So,
you mentioned,
did I answer that question?
Yeah, you did. Yeah. You also mentioned a fear of being accepted by society at large. 2 questions. Could you have made that move had you not had the support of the family? I'll ask that question first.
That's I don't think anybody's ever asked that. It's a good one. That's tough to say. I don't know. I'd like to say, I would have made the change no matter what. My family was supportive about it. But they didn't make me do it, or nobody made me do it. And,
right.
And it was just something that I felt like once I started seeing these things, and I didn't actually finish explaining what some of the final straws were for me, was seeing some of the violence. Of course, there's been violence all those years, but some of the mass shootings and things that were starting to go on, I felt like more and more of that was coming. And now was if I really want to do something good with my life and with the skill set that I have, I need to start now. I need to start talking about this stuff. I need to get out there and speak out about this stuff and try to make a difference before more innocent lives are lost. And some of the people that criticize the things, the work that we do, they've said, I've heard, things they'll say, oh, he's just trying to save his old Nazi buddies. That's why he's doing this work. Well, they don't understand it because sure, it's great if you say, save a life there. But when I talk about saving lives, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the public. I'm talking about when you look at what happened in Pittsburgh, in the synagogue, or if you go to Christchurch in the mosque, or Poway, California, the synagogues, or the Walmart shooters, these people that have done horrific crimes against humanity. If we can off-ramp the next one, and I'm not naming them because I don't feel like they need to be named, but if we can off-ramp the next shooter, how many lives does that save? That's the value of the work that we do. It's not about saving that one guy that might go do something crazy. That's bonus points. It's about saving the lives of the innocents. And that's what motivates me. And it was, the fears and the concerns about leaving, some of them were kind of selfish, like, well, what can I do? What can I do? Those are the selfish reasons. And everybody has those because we all have bills to pay. We all have to make a living and all that. And and I didn't have all that figured out. I knew I was going to speak out, but I was like, well, now is the time. I can't window gloss an organization like this anymore. I shouldn't be. I need to be speaking out, and I need to do it now. And it took me some months of what I call like the decompression process, where you're sorting your life out. For some people, it's years. Some people, it's weeks. Everybody's different. But for me, I took that time between early 2019 when I got out to August, September is when I went public.
You kind of mentioned the people that kind of have said, yeah, you're just trying to save your buddies from the past. And the second part of my question to the previous one was, what has it been like? Was it as you expected, or was the response to you beginning to speak out, go public with the fact that you'd left, was it better than you imagined? What was it like?
Well, it has its challenges. I mean, it's not easy, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. And everybody's story is a little different because of how high profile I was. I have probably more skeptics and people that don't want to hear what I have to say because of the amount of time that I spent in there. And in reflection, I can understand that, but at the same time, no national leader has ever walked away in the United States out of all the people that are speaking out. And I don't say that to talk myself up or pat myself on the back, because it's something I carry with a lot of shame and guilt. It's not something I'm proud of. But because I have this understanding, this deep understanding and that skill set, I feel like I would be remiss as a human being to not do my part to make a difference. So my critics, I really don't care what they say. I've had critics since day one, since I started speaking out. I've had people that probably should have been more supportive or could have helped me out, that have, kicked things into my way or been difficult. But that's life in general. I don't think that's, I think that's just life in general. I don't know. But no regrets whatsoever. I mean, I'm going to help people whether people like it or not.
Has it been scary at all?
I still don't like the word fear. I'm honestly, though, as far as fear, we talk about, is it scary and all that. Starting your life over, Yeah, I guess so. I just don't like the word, but yeah, it's you have to learn life over. I refer to it as, this is civilian life. Like, being in the movement was like being at war with everyone for all those years. So I'm used to a really high stress environment. So civilian life is completely different for me. I have to learn how things work in civil society and all that. So it's been really interesting. It's been challenging. And of course, there's hurdles and there's obstacles and all that kind of stuff. But I don't regret it for 1 minute. I mean, it's the right thing to do. And I just hope to inspire, keep inspiring others. We've helped a lot of people walk away, so I'm proud of that work.
Do you find yourself, do old ideologies come and sit on your shoulder ever and like whisper in your ear when you hear maybe something political or something that's going on in society? Certainly over the last 18 months, we've been inundated with it. Do you ever have to cram those back down or push those away? Do they still make an appearance every now and then?
It is pretty common for people to experience things like that. I haven't really struggled a whole lot with that, to be honest. When I do something, when I get involved in something, as my past history unfortunately demonstrates, I kind of go all in, for lack of a better word. So I'm really dedicated to the work that I do now and helping people. But it is something that we, especially with a lot of the social upheaval starting in 2020, a lot of people, even people that have been out a long time, they really struggle with that. Or I had a lot of people asking me, like, when the riots and all that stuff started, they were like, well, how does it feel to be working in peace building now when you predicted all the stuff that's happening right now? And it's like, oh no. It's like, I don't want to hear that stuff. I don't want to hear it. But, that's why I feel like this work is more important now than ever, because when you're seeing some of those divisions that are happening in our country, and I feel it's actually probably less about race and more about political standing. And a lot of the radicalization that we're seeing right now, a lot of it, race is an underlying factor, but a lot of it is more political, and we can fix that, but we all have to do it together as a nation. So I think that answers it. You
even mentioned it at the onset of our conversation. You are in the middle. You will be you will say that the extremist on the left and the extremist on the right, you'll be as critical of Antifa as you are of Proud Boys, to throw an organization out there. That conversation that you just mentioned just now, Jeff, how do we begin to have that? You also mentioned that a lot of the ways that people are trying, a lot of organizations are trying to fight extremism, you saw a need that they're not doing it, quote unquote, the right way. What is the way? How do we begin to have these dialogues when we seem so fractionalized?
Well, and that's a question I definitely would like to answer. And when I say that I see people doing it in the wrong way, I want to be careful on how I say that, because I don't want to be hypercritical, especially of people that have been doing the work longer than I have and that are trying their hardest and doing the best they can at that. I don't want to be critical when I say that. It's my opinion. I've had a lot of people that have reached out that say they won't talk to other groups or other individuals. They'll talk to me because they watch what we put out on social media and things like that. And I watch too. So I see what some of the other individuals put out. And I've seen a lot of, for lack of a better word, hypocrisy. A lot of people that will say things like, well, we need to crack down on the far right and this is bad. But at the same time, they won't criticize people on the far left, or they'll even amplify some of the talking points that extreme left organizations do. And if you understand anything about this kind of work or anything about the way the human mind works and all that sort of thing, you realize that the extreme far left, and I'm just using this as an example, and the extreme far right, they hate each other, right? But they're symbiotic to one another. It's like action and reaction. Another way we can point this out in society is like the United States fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan. You know, you bomb a house and you kill somebody's uncle, the whole family's honor bound, duty bound to fight back, and you're going to have an ongoing war of attrition forever and ever and ever. This is the same, going back to the human nature aspect of it, between the far left and the far right. It's very symbiotic. So if you have people that are supposed to be counter extremism experts or supposed to be formers and they're saying like, look, this is what we should support. I've seen, and I'm not going to name anybody because I don't do that. I don't play that game, but I can think of one individual that's working for a counter extremism organization, actually, that was talking about America is a white supremacist country and we need to burn it down, publicly posting that kind of stuff on Twitter in public. And that, how can that person's an extremist? How is that person going to help anybody get out? They're not. And when people see that, when the people that are on the far right that are reaching out to different organizations, that's why they ask, are you a communist? Are you on the extreme left now? That sort of thing. And it's because they're watching that. They're watching the other people say things like that. So I'm saying this in a sense, not try to be hypercritical, but this is one of the important things, especially you're working for a nonprofit, you're out there trying to make a difference. You can have your own personal political opinions, but if it's that extreme, you're not helping nobody get out. It's just a fact. And if you're saying things like that, you're kind of being a hypocrite. And I know a few things about hypocrisy. I was involved in an organization that was not recognizing the humanity of most of the world. So I feel like I understand this stuff, and I'm not afraid to point it out. And I'm not going to say what people want me to say. I'm going to speak the truth no matter what. So
how do we best recognize the humanity of someone else?
A lot of times it's when you're involved in one form of extremism or another, it's really hard to see that. And the rhetoric from both sides is equally as vicious and as hateful. Some of them will talk about just the worst examples you can think of towards your fellow man, and reconnecting on a interpersonal level, like what Daryl Davis and Dia Khan did, bringing those stories, showing your own humanity. In a way, it's sort of making yourself vulnerable to have those conversations, to talk about things like that, and to show the other side that, look, that's a human being across from you. That's not the enemy, the so-called enemy. That's a human being. And this has been done in wars and things like that throughout time. Even the United States has been guilty of it. If you look back to the World War II history, like how the cartoons and different propaganda against the Japanese people led to internment camps in the United States. The Germans, the Nazi party did it in Germany to the Jewish people, vilified the Jews so badly that genocide wasn't, a big deal to some of the people, because they dehumanized them. They dehumanized an entire population, and we did it. And the United States was guilty of doing it to the Japanese people as well. And I could go on and on with historical examples. But when you start dehumanizing your opposition, and we see it between Democrats and Republicans today, even at the highest levels where they dehumanize the other side, when you start losing track of that humanity, you lose your own humanity in the process. And that's going back to what we were talking about earlier, where you can't see the humanity of the other. And this is interesting. Not long before I left, I was doing an interview with some news program out of Chile or somewhere in South America. And I was talking about dehumanization and the irony of this, of a Nazi leader talking about dehumanization. And they were just staring at me like, what in the world is this guy talking about? I couldn't figure it out at the time. But when I was processing things later, Well, of course they're going to look at me funny. Why? Here's a guy that's dehumanized people most of his adult life, talking about the media dehumanizes us Nazis. Like, the irony of that is stupendous, but I couldn't see it at the time. So when you are a dehumanizer, it's difficult to see the humanity of the other. So if we can rehumanize and reconnect our humanity, a long version to answer your question here, but if we can reconnect that humanity and show the human side of it instead of dehumanizing, once that connection has been made and we saw it, and if you watch Dia Khan's film, you can see it play out in real time, because she's asking people, well, would you deport me? Would you do this? The people got uncomfortable because they liked her. So they were like, no, I wouldn't, no. I wouldn't do that to you, Dia, because a personal connection was made. So if we can rehumanize the so-called other, in whatever the other is or whoever the other is, that's the key.
Jeff, what is a question that you wish you were asked more?
I mean, since I've been out of the movement?
Sure.
Or just in general? What's the question?
I'll let you take that wherever you want. What's a question you wish you were asked more?
This is so open-ended. That's a hard one to answer. I just want to be able to show people that we can reconnect. If we can reconnect with one another, human being to human being, the world is so much more beautiful and such a better place than when you're involved in these things. You get very bogged down into hating the other and fighting back, and you're going to defend your people and you're going to do all this sort of thing. It's a very difficult life. It's a hard life, and you get used to it, and you don't see a way out. You don't see a light at the end of that tunnel. You just keep fighting. And so I guess I wish people would ask more questions about how can we reconnect that? How can we do that? Because I don't think that most human beings are inherently evil. And I don't think most people that are involved in this, in fact, I know most people involved in this stuff are not inherently evil like some of the narratives show them out to be. What they're doing, what they're saying, yes, it's evil, it's wrong, it's bad. We know that on this side of things, we all know that, but they don't realize that. So if we can be better at helping them to, see and understand these things, we probably have a lot less of this stuff to deal with in the future.
Good stuff, man. Jeff, how can people connect with you, follow along with your work and your organization?
They can go to beyondbarriersusa.org or jeffschoep.com, beyondbarriersusa.org.
I will be sure to link all that up. Jeff, thank you so much for your time today, man, for telling your story and for the work that you do for a podcast that's all about asking questions to find common ground. Great stuff, man. I loved it. Thank you so much.
It's an honor to be on your program. Thank you so much for having me, and keep up the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you. I hope you all have enjoyed the last 2 weeks, my interviews with Jesse and Jeff. So many thanks to these guys. Today, to Jeff for sharing their story, for Jeff to share his story here on the show. Please do me and Jeff a huge favor and share this episode with someone you know who might also find some value in listening to this conversation. Share this episode with your network on your social media and help me spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions and the change that it can bring about. If you like the conversations with the amazing guests like Jeff that I have on this show each and every week, be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always email me. It's michael@thefollowupquestion.com, or you can go to thefollowupquestion.com and reach out there. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question, and until then, keep asking questions.